And welcome into Gator Bytes on the 1010XL.com podcast network, also being simulcast on the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page. Today's Gator podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialists. They're Northeast Florida's leading orthopedic center, providing an unparalleled level of care across numerous locations in both Jacksonville and St. Augustine. That includes Riverside, Northside, the South Side, the beaches, Fleming Island, and St. John's. He is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker Ryan Green, as we welcome you in for the first time in a couple of weeks to Gator Bytes. And Graham, the spring football duties are underway, although the scheduling of it was weird, right? They went a week, and then they took a week off for spring break, and now they're back. I don't really understand why that happened.
Yeah, I don't either.
That was bizarre, right?
It is bizarre.
It was bizarre. But nevertheless, they're back, and depending on what you read, it's been pretty good out there, and everybody's talking about Graham Mertz. And I think, at least the practice reports I've gotten, the people I've talked to down in Gainesville, Graham Mertz has been solid, which I guess is better than some other adjectives that could be used.
Bad.
It's better than bad, right? Look, the expectations for Graham Mertz were not very high coming in, but here's how somebody phrased it to me. Is he going to run for an 80-yard touchdown against LSU? No. That's Anthony Richardson that did that. But on 3rd down and 5, is Graham Mertz going to complete a 6-yard button hook for a first down? Yes. And you could not always say that with Anthony Richardson. So maybe that's one way for Gator fans to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ceiling is lower and the floor is higher. I think that's probably the easiest way to say it.
I like that, yeah.
Exactly, which is exactly what you just said. So sometimes Ant, and even, our good friend Denny Thompson has admitted this as well, that Ant's probably biggest struggle, I would say, on the field has been short area accuracy. And yeah, that can be really tough, especially in a tight game when you really need those 4 yards on 3rd down or those 5 yards on 3rd or whatever. Exactly like you just said. You got to hit those. I guess the next question, though, is going to be similar to the question Ant had last year, is who is Graham Mertz throwing to?
Yeah, Ricky Pearsall, obviously back in the fold. It would appear he's going to be wide receiver 1. Justin Shorter is gone, so that certainly hurts a little bit. Xavier Henderson's a guy that just hasn't really emerged. And then you got a lot of young guys, right? A lot of freshmen. Now, you also have Jaquavion Fraziers, who I expected a lot out of last year. It didn't materialize. I think he's a guy you kind of have to look to because you can only expect so much from those true freshmen.
Yeah, some of these dudes are no longer young guys anymore, and they need to start playing consistent football for Florida. And
that's fair.
Jaquavion Fraziers he's in his 3rd year in the program, I believe.
At least.
Yeah. When it's your 3rd year in the program, it's time for you to be a good contributor. In this era of the transfer portal, it's rare to ever see anybody hit year 3 and they're not contributing quite a bit on the field. We know in terms of Graham Mertz having some help, we know he's going to have a really nice backfield, and that's great. Mm-hmm. And I think you and I both probably really like Ricky Pearsall, but we saw a lot out of him last year that there was to like. I don't think he's going to be, he's not going to be setting UF records, but he's a good player.
No, I'll go a little old school, probably old school for you. You might have heard of the name, but there was a guy in the late 90s named Travis McGriff. I think Ricky Pearsall's Travis McGriff. And if he's Travis McGriff, that'd be great.
Of course I'm Travis McGriff.
Okay, very good. How dare I underestimate you? If he's Travis McGriff, that's great. But is Travis McGriff considered to be a top 25 Gator receiver of all time? Probably not. So It's one of those deals where I think, like you said, the ceiling and the floor. Ricky Pearsall is a nice player. Is he a game changer like a Riedel Anthony or an Ike Hilliard or a Jacquez Green or a Percy Harvin? Obviously not. You're hoping one of the young guys could potentially be that in time.
Yeah, where's the guy that Mertz can hit on a 3-yard slant?
And he takes it 60.
He's making one guy miss and he's gone. Agreed. Where's that guy? That's the guy that I need. Because last year, and again, in defense of Anthony Richardson, last year, there was nobody like that. If anybody was going to take it to the house like that, it was him. There was no receiver that he was doing. I mean, the best quarterback to ever put on a Gator uniform is Tebow, right? Tebow had those guys. The other, if you were to argue somebody, it'd be probably Warfel. Warfel had those guys.
Warfel had the best trio of wide receivers Florida's ever had.
Exactly.
With Anthony Hilliard and Green.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and before that, he had Doring for a couple of years.
Right. And those teams won national championships, so it's unrealistic to say that we need those guys. We're not going to have those guys. It's not going to happen. But can we get something in the middle? Can we throw you a 3-yard slant and you give me 20?
Yeah.
Can we get some help like that? I'm kind of sick of either an incomplete pass or a catch and I'm getting tackled immediately. I'm kind of sick of that when I watch games on Saturday.
Well, the one thing too, you mentioned the running game and the offensive line. Look, Montrell Johnson and Trevor Etienne potentially could be one of the best 1-2 combos in the SEC. And maybe at least on the ballot for one of the best 1-2 combos in the country.
Oh, yeah.
The offensive line is going to be obviously a huge factor because, as anybody knows, a running back is only as good as his offensive line. Now, Richard Garage is gone. Osiris Torrance is gone. Ethan White transferred out. You've lost some other guys along that line. Now, where Florida did well in the portal, at least what I've heard in spring, is they brought in 3 or 4 guys from the portal, the kid from Baylor, George from Alabama, the kid from Kentucky, that, again, that word potential, which Gator fans don't like to hear, potentially they brought in some pretty good players along the line. The question is, will the cohesiveness be there? Can they mesh in time for opening day, Labor Day weekend against Utah? Because I would think, Graham, right now, 2 of those portal guys are probably going to be starting for you, if not 3.
And look, I mean, last year your best offensive lineman was a portal guy, but he was the only portal guy.
Right.
Everybody else had multiple years in the program at Florida. Granted, over 2 coaching staffs, but this year I agree with you. I think this year is a much bigger test on that coaching staff to get them ready, particularly early in the season. That Utah game Thursday night to kick off the season.
By the way, I hate that. That's a Thursday night game.
I'm not a huge fan of it either. It probably doesn't bother me as much as it bothers you, but...
Well, it bothers me because, I mean, as if those Utah fans weren't going to be fired up enough for Saturday.
Yeah,
that's
fair.
The national game on Thursday night to open the college football season. I'm sure ESPN or somebody's televising that bad boy. I can't imagine the last time an SEC team went out to Salt Lake City. You want to talk about a hornet's nest?
Oh, yeah.
That's what Florida's going to go into out there.
A hornet's nest with, like we just talked about, brand new starting offensive lineman, a brand new quarterback, a lot of I would say 2 more than likely wide receivers that have never been starters before.
And a fired up Utah team who let one get away against you last year.
That brought back a ton of talent as well. Their quarterback's back.
Right. He did tear the ACL in the Rose Bowl. So who knows if he'll be 100%. We'll see. But Cam Rising's who we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, we've talked the schedule next year. It's not even next year anymore. It's this year. The schedule this year is brutal.
Oh, it's so brutal.
I mean, honestly, of the 12 games, Florida's going to be the favorite in minimum 3, right? You got McNeese State, which is a joke, Charlotte, and I'll say Vanderbilt. I know Vandy beat them last year, but come on. It's in the swamp.
They're obviously going to be favored.
They should be the favorite against Vanderbilt. To me, the toss-up games, where you could be the favorite, you might not be. I think you will be. Home against Arkansas, at Missouri. The other 7, you're probably the underdog, right?
Yeah.
Utah, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, LSU, Florida State. Are they the favorite in any of those games?
I don't
South
think
Carolina
so.
is in Columbia. That's a road game.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to.
I don't think they're going to be favored in any of those 7 games.
South Carolina's the one that you could maybe say.
Yeah. But again, Spencer Rattler's back. You got to go up there to Williams-Brice Stadium.
In Kentucky, you got to go to Lexington
with Devin Leary at quarterback.
After they beat you last year.
After they beat you twice in a row. Yeah.
So
it's going to be a lot of underdog for the Gators. But Florida's going to be more of an underdog in more games in 2023 than they've been in a long, long time.
And this kind of sucks for Billy Napier, but it's just the reality. I think it's going to be one of those, almost like this past season. I think it's going to be one of those years where you're midway through the season and, because you're in the middle of the season, every game's kind of fresh on your mind, and you look at each game and you're like, oh, well, that team's good. So, and it was a good game and they played well or whatever. And you're going to be able to justify a lot of losses perhaps, but you're going to look up and their record's not going to be something that you enjoy as a Gator fan.
Mm-hmm.
And you know how this fan base works. If they look up year two being completed with Billy Napier, and they only got 6 or 7 wins, that seat temperature is going to rise.
No, if you go 6 and 7 again, you're 12 and 14 in 2 years. The reality of the situation at the University of Florida is Gator fans' expectations, fair or not, are way, way, way higher than 12 and 14 in 2 years. You can't fire Billy Napier. You can't keep rotating these coaches in and out, in and out, in and out. But no, absolutely. There'll be a lot of negativity surrounding the program. Florida's in a tough spot right now. Now, in 2024, in the recruiting class led by DJ Lagway, the 5-star quarterback out of Texas, right now they're in the top, I think, 5 of that recruiting cycle. So it might be one of those things where the night is darkest just before the dawn, as they say. Maybe this thing could turn around beginning in 24. But in 23, I hear people saying 8 and 4. 9 and 3, and I'm thinking you're out of your mind.
Find me 9 wins.
Right, you find me 9. Now look, can they? I'm not going to say they can't do it because in the world of sports, can't is a very interesting term because we've seen a lot,
particularly in college football.
Right,
but
on paper here in late March, looking ahead to 2023, find me 9 wins on that. Find me 8 wins on that schedule.
I felt the exact same way, and people might be watching this being like, Jesus is the 2 most negative people on planet Earth, but it's
call it negative or call it reality.
Right, it's the facts. I mean, who thinks we're going to go to Jacksonville and beat Georgia? Who thinks Florida's going to go to Utah and win? Who thinks Florida's going to beat? And I get it. It's more about the coin flip games.
Well, you need Florida. Florida needs to beat Missouri, South Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, I guess. That game's in Gainesville. But even so, Tennessee's got a much more talented roster right now.
Tennessee's a big wild card in terms of I'm not sure how good they're going to be.
Joe Milton's pretty good, man. I know
that's what I'm saying. They could be really good again.
Yeah.
Or they could take a big dip. I'm not totally sure. They're losing Tillman and Hyatt, which is a big deal. But still, the point remains. There's a lot of these coin flip games that are not coin flip games for Florida. They're more 70-20, 75-25 in favor of the opponent. There's probably 4 games that way.
Georgia, Florida State.
Well, those I think those are even overwhelming. Florida State maybe. The Kentucky, Tennessee, South Carolina, Missouri. But we just talked about. Florida's probably not going to be favored in any of those.
No, then you go to LSU, you go to Utah, Georgia here, Florida State and Gainesville. It's tough. There's no doubt about that. Today's Gator Bytes podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialists. For the highest quality care, you can rely on Southeast Orthopedic Specialists for any orthopedic injury or concern. You can log on to their website by going to se-ortho.com, and you can listen for Southeast Orthopedic Specialist, the good doctor, Kevin Murphy, on Thursday mornings in the 7 o'clock hour with Jeff and Dan right here on 1010XL for his weekly analysis of injuries in the world of sports. Quickly, you are a Gator alum.
I am.
You have orange and blue blood pumping through your veins.
That is correct.
Your reaction when 29-year-old Austin Armstrong was named the Gator defensive coordinator?
One thing about Billy Napier is he, as low-key of a guy as he is, he hires some attention-grabbing coaches, right? I mean, Corey Raymond was the first one that was huge. I mean, that's, to this day, a phenomenal hire. I mean, bringing Billy Gonzalez back was kind of crazy. Armstrong, I'm going to be honest, I don't know anything about him. I have no idea. Armstrong might be fantastic, and he might be atrocious. I really don't know.
He ran a good defense at Southern Miss. He was a D coordinator at Southern Miss when he was 27.
That's crazy.
27 years old. He was a D coordinator.
I'm 25.
Yeah, in D1 college football.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, I'm almost 40. Imagine my thoughts when I see a 29-year-old as a defensive coordinator. I've only heard him talk a handful of times at his press conference. I've talked to people that covered him at Southern Miss briefly while he had a cup of coffee at Alabama. He was hired to coach linebackers at Alabama, and then Patrick Toney left. Billy Napier went to go get him from Nick Saban's staff. He's gotten rave reviews. Everybody I've talked to, everybody likes him. Everybody thinks he's a good football mind. But that's a lot for a 29-year-old that's never been a coordinator in the Power 5 to come in and try to turn around a Gator defense last year, Graham, that quite frankly was terrible.
Oh, it was atrocious. You're looking at in 2020 and 2022, those were two of the worst defenses in the history of the school. Maybe the two worst defenses in the history of the school. And those were that was with two different defensive coordinators. So you can't even pin it all on one guy. And it's not like 2021 was some great year either. So, I mean, something has to give defensively with the Gators. And look, there is some context to it. When you look across college football on any given Saturday, the defense has gotten substantially worse in the last 10 to 15 years. We all know that. That doesn't surprise anybody. I mean, even Alabama this year, speaking of Alabama, they blow coverages all the time now. It's crazy. I don't know how. I need someone much smarter than me in the football world and the coaching world to explain to me how guys just blow coverages that often in college football. But with Florida, it's been especially bad. They seem to be even worse off than everybody else. And it's because, in my opinion, it's because they're making the same mistakes that other schools are making, big-time schools, but they're not recruiting the Will Andersons and the Jalen Carters and those guys that kind of make up for that.
Oh, they're recruiting them. They're just not getting the signatures on the letters of intent.
You get what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. And to me, look, it's one thing if you give up a 70-yard bomb for a touchdown, if you blow a coverage, all right, I'm not happy about it, but whatever. It's when teams go 10 for 13 on third down.
Yeah.
And you just cannot get off the field, man.
Right.
And then last year, Florida, I don't know what their third down defense was, but I bet it was horrible.
They were more effective on 3rd and 2 than they were on 3rd and 11.
It was unreal.
If it was 3rd and long, they were giving it up every time.
And we talk so much about Anthony Richardson and replacing him, and that's obviously important. I'm not breaking any news there. You lost your Anthony Richardson on the defensive side of the ball, too, with Ventrell Miller.
Yeah.
That is a gigantic loss from on the field to leadership to everything he provided. And I don't know who's going to be the next Ventrell Miller, but they're going to have to find somebody because without him, without Dexter, say what you will about Trey Dean, he at least played a lot of football in a Gator uniform, Brenton Cox as well. I mean, those were essentially their playmakers on defense that are all gone now here in 2023.
And I also don't know who's replacing Ventrell Miller, but I do know that whoever it is has not played a ton of snaps in a Gator uniform. I mean, you're probably thinking Derek Wingo and...
Wingo's the first one that came to mind.
Wingo and Shamar James are the two guys that I would imagine, at least early on in the year, are going to get the first crack at a lot of snaps. Wingo has been on the roster for a while now and has not played a whole lot. So there's something that he has not shown, because I think it's year 3 for him as well.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So... he hasn't really done much up to this point except play special teams. And Shamar James got on the field a decent amount last year.
As a true freshman, he and Kamari Wilson played quite a bit.
Correct.
McClellan, too, on the D-line.
But as you know, like we just said, comparing him to Anthony Richardson, middle linebacker is the quarterback of the defense. You're supposed to get other people aligned.
Yeah.
Shamar James played, but he was never really responsible for other people. That was typically Ventrell Miller's thing. So... will he thrive in that role?
I'll give you another one. Ventrell Miller and Amari Burney, the two guys that won the Utah game. Burney's now gone, too.
Yeah.
So
two guys that have played a ton of football in Gator uniforms.
And what people will say, listening, I'm sure, is, but they, you could find better players. I don't know if you can find somebody better in the middle than Ventrell Miller. You might be able to replace Amari Burney. You might be able to find somebody better than Trey Dean. Ron Dexter, I think, is going to be a better pro than he was a college player, and I'm not sure why. But Ventrell Miller, to me, the heart and soul of that defense, he is going to be a tough one to replace. Quickly, because I want to end on basketball, but when you look around the Southeastern Conference right now, we haven't talked about this since it came out. It's probably going to be finalized here in the next 6 to 8 weeks. Texas and Oklahoma coming in 2024. It looks like the SEC is going to go to a 9-game conference schedule. And the word is there's going to be 3 constants, meaning 3 teams you play every year. And there's going to be 6 rotators. And word on the street is that the Florida constants, the every year opponents, potentially could be Georgia, South Carolina, and Oklahoma, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
Which means then you lose the every year battle with LSU, with Kentucky, to a lesser extent Missouri, Vanderbilt,
with Tennessee. Yeah, Tennessee's the big one.
So Tennessee, LSU, I think are the two big ones that you would lose. Kentucky too. They've played Kentucky forever.
Yeah.
And that rivalry's gotten obviously better as Kentucky's won some more games. You and I are of different ages. I'm in my late 30s. You're in your mid 20s. If you find out that that's true and that they lose the every year games with Tennessee, Kentucky, and LSU, will you be okay with that? Will that bother you?
Personally, it'll bother me early, but I think just like anytime the schedule changes up in a couple of years when rivalries kind of heat up naturally with other games, I don't think it'll bother me as much, because what I do understand is, and what I do love about it is, in turn, that means I'm getting Auburn in the swamp more often.
Right. Now,
that means I'm getting Alabama in the swamp more often.
That's a great point. Let me just, and for context, you're going to play every team once every 2 years. All right.
Which is a huge win for the conference.
But like for LSU as an example, Florida fans, I know you love going to the Bayou every 2 years. I've been there with you with hand grenades and at Pat O'Brien's on Bourbon Street. I know it. That's not going to be every 2 years now. It's going to be every 4 years. You go to LSU. Only one trip to Baton Rouge every 4 years, which is going to be the big change.
Yeah, me personally too, because of my own college experience, I think my perspective might be different, because I was a student for the 2019 Auburn game. I was in the student section, and I think it's the best Gator game I've ever been to.
Oh, no, keep in mind, Auburn, before South Carolina and Arkansas arrived in 1992,
was a huge rivalry.
You could argue Florida-Auburn was as big as Florida-Georgia.
Which is crazy to think about.
But the reason Florida-Auburn went away is because Auburn obviously wanted to keep the dogs. So Auburn kept Georgia, thus having to knock Florida out, and Florida had to go get LSU, and that's how it happened. But pre-1992, I remember my dad telling me about those Pat Dye Auburn teams and Pat Sullivan and all these great Florida-Auburn battles. But yeah, you're right. The idea is you play 3 teams every year, but in playing 6 rotators, you will play every Southeastern Conference team once in a 2-year period, thus twice in a 4-year period. So if you go to school for 4 years, you will visit every SEC stadium at least once.
Which is awesome.
Yeah.
Which is fantastic. Like the whole Auburn thing, for me, I got lucky just because of the 4 years I happened to be in Gainesville. Like 2019 just happened to be one of those years.
Mm-hmm.
But if I was a substantial time before that, before, what was it, 07 or something, or 06 or something like that, the last time Auburn had been, or the last time they had played in Gainesville, I don't even remember what year it was, but anyways, that's insane. Like, why is it that long that Florida and Auburn are playing each other at all? That's ridiculous.
We've talked about this. Florida's been to College Station 3 times.
And Georgia's never been?
Right, since A&M joined the conference.
Like, what are we doing?
Georgia's never been there, which is unfair. That's first and foremost, and I have a real issue with that, but that will go away now under this format quickly. If it is Georgia, South Carolina, Oklahoma, that would be interesting if Florida-Oklahoma was an every year game.
And it'd be freaking awesome too. It would kind of suck if, you're getting Oklahoma and then Georgia's getting Vanderbilt or something. From that perspective, it sucks. But from a perspective of just having fun and showing up to the game and it being packed, that's fantastic.
Well, I almost think it would work out for Florida because you lose LSU. Yeah. I think at this point, I would take Oklahoma every year over LSU every year.
Yeah, which is hard to say right now because the LSU rivalry is so fresh.
Yeah.
But I think they're relatively the same.
Well, Nick Saban's the one guy that's already come out and is not happy because the word is Alabama is going to be stuck with LSU, with Auburn, and I believe with Tennessee. So every year they're going to get LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee.
Yeah.
Which that's tough, right?
That is tough.
I mean, that's tough. So, again, we'll see what happens. They're going to talk about this at the meetings in Destin, I believe in May. And they got to be finalized pretty quick because keep in mind, the SEC always releases their schedule like a year in advance. So we're talking October. The schedule normally comes out, which is
it's
about
always during the season.
Yeah, like 6.5 months from now, we should know exactly what the SEC is going to do.
The other thing, real quick,
scheduling was.
Last thing I'll say on this topic that is a really nice fix is we've seen, like, particularly during the Alabama dynasty, how the West has been much better than the East in the last, not now because Georgia's built what Georgia is, but it does help the whole, like, you know, if you're in the West and you're not Alabama, you've been screwed for the last however long. Well, now the East is going to have to face some of that, and the West is going to have to face, like, the West can't just avoid Georgia now, and the East can't just avoid Alabama. Everybody's got to play.
Well, yeah, and there won't be any more West and East.
Correct.
Yeah, divisions are going away.
Right, so everyone's got to play everybody. You're not getting bailed out because you just don't have to play whoever.
Yeah, I believe the divisions already went away in basketball, and now they are going away in football. Today's Gator Podcast is brought to you by Southeast Orthopedic Specialists. They're Northeast Florida's leading orthopedic center, providing an unparalleled level of care across numerous locations in both Jacksonville and St. Augustine. That includes Riverside, Northside, the South Side, the beaches, Fleming Island, and St. John's. All right, Graham, as we wrap up, the Gator basketball season, I'll say mercifully, came to an end, but how embarrassing was that? The NIT lost to Central Florida, and it wasn't even a game there in Gainesville last week. But since that loss, 4 Gator basketball players have entered the transfer portal. We know the graduations as well. So I think the total is 9 guys that played at one point this year are now no longer with the Gator basketball team.
It's just like the year before.
And the season's been over for 1 week.
Yeah, it's just like the year before. I mean, the whole team next year is going to be brand new.
You were very, not to put words in your mouth, but I think you would agree. You were critical of Mike White, correct? You thought it was time to go.
Yes.
All right, 100%. Your reaction to year number 1 of Todd Golden?
Not good enough. I mean, he's new. He's brand new. I get it. I'm not firing him right now. That's not what I'm saying, but it's not good enough.
Do you give him a pass because of Castleton's injury?
A little bit, yes, but I don't think you can be in a position where you're already average and losing that guy completely screws your season. If you have a guy that's going to be like an NBA lottery pick and that happens, I think that's a little bit different. But as good as Castleton is, he's still in college basketball for a reason, right? So if that level of guy, again, no disrespect to Castleton, he's a really, really good college player.
You could argue, since Patrick Young, probably the best big man Florida's had.
Yeah,
in 10 years.
He's been fantastic. So again, I no disrespect to him whatsoever. He's a really, really good player. But I don't think we're talking about Oscar Tshiebwe here. You know what I mean? We're not talking about Joel Embiid or something. So
no, he's a good basketball player.
He's a good college player.
Is he going to be in the NBA? Probably not.
And if he is, he'll be a rotational guy that gives you some energy minutes, right? We're not talking about a lottery NBA pick. And again, like last year, if Duke had lost like Paolo Banchero, then like, okay, that's different. Like that guy's going to be a top 3 pick in the draft. If you lose him, he's obviously going to drastically change your season. But to lose just a guy who's just a really good college player, and that means you now have literally no offense, that's not good enough.
Is that on Todd Golden, though? Again, he inherited Mike White's team. Now,
correct.
Todd Golden brought in the best player Florida had after Castleton, which was Riley Kugel,
yes.
or at least he kept him, right?
Yes, that's
so. Correct. Here's my thing with Golden. We're going to know pretty quick.
I agree.
Because he's got to get in the portal, and he has to do a better job in the portal than he did last year. Last year was not good enough in the transfer portal for Todd Golden. He has got to get in the portal, and he has got to get some guys. He's got to go find his Dorian Finney-Smith.
Yes.
He's got to go find his Vernon Macklin. He's got to go find his portal guys, much like Billy Donovan and to an extent Mike White did, and getting guys out of the portal that came in to do really good things for the Gators. And if Todd Golden does that, okay. If he does not do that, there's a problem.
If he doesn't do that, then there should be a new coach for Florida basketball in 2 to 3 years.
Well, and then you get into the, you got to give him some time. But I agree.
But I'm not firing him right now. I'm talking about 2 or 3 years from now.
Yeah.
At that point, he'd have been on the job 3 to 4 years.
But, I got Mark Wise coming on Hacker After Dark, actually tonight, filling in for Rick Ballou. So we're doing this, then we're heading on over to do radio in 1 second. And Mark Wise, formerly of the Gator Network, now he does all his work on the ESPN family of networks. And he said, look, during our conversation, this is college basketball. Look at Kansas State. Kansas State, who's in the Sweet 16. 5 starters out of the transfer portal. It wasn't just Keontae Johnson. All the other guys were out of the portal as well. They went out and got an entire starting lineup last year out of the portal. That's good enough for a 3 seed, and they're still playing in the Sweet 16. So that's what you have to do.
So knowing that, does that not shorten the clock for coaches a little bit to get it figured out?
You got to get it figured out. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because listen, if this was back in the day before the one and dones, when you had the way that you built the team was you had to bring in recruits and they needed 2 or 3 years to develop. And if that was the case, then I would say, yeah, you need to give Golden more time. But this was part of the reason that I thought time was out on Mike White. If I'm seeing all these other schools go pick up 1 or 2 guys and it's making them a 3 seed in the Sweet 16, in my school that's just as big, has the same exact resources, can't do that, that's a problem. I'm not expecting you to be Duke and Carolina every year.
Right.
But I'm expecting, if Kansas State can do it, Florida can do it, is what I'm saying.
That's a good point. And final thought, the one, I guess, silver lining for Todd Golden, the feather in the cap, at least for year 1, is he did sweep Mike White. He beat him twice. True. Because if Mike White would have beat him twice, or even once really, but certainly twice, then the conversation obviously might be a lot different. But Todd Golden can say, I beat Mike White in Gainesville this year, and I went up to Athens and beat him. And I think that was big for year 1.
I think there was literally one game on the schedule that he absolutely had to win, no questions asked, and it was when Mike White came to Gainesville.
Yeah. And they got it done.
You could not lose that game. And they were down. They were down pretty big, and they came back and won, so they had to win that game.
The silver lining was, and you go up to Athens, and you beat him on his home court as well. That is Graham Marsh. I'm the hacker Ryan Green. This has been Gator Bytes on the 1010XL.com podcast network, also on the Florida Gator 1010XL Facebook page. We will be back, we'll say 2 weeks. We'll talk cool spring ball. The spring game is April 13th. It's right around the corner. Of course, Gator Pro Day next week as well, as things continue to happen down there for the athletic program at the University of Florida.